The sky was a frontier, vast, open, and untouched. The earliest aviators who dared to rise into it did so without guidance, without rules, without anyone watching from below. They flew by instinct, by compass, by the sun and stars. The sky was theirs alone, until it wasn't. As more aircraft took to the air, the freedom of flight began to brush against the edges of danger. The sky, once a sanctuary of solitude, grew crowded. And with that crowding came the need for something new. A system, a structure, a way to keep order in the lanes above the world. Thus began the story of air traffic control, and of the men and women who would become its silent guardians. The first signals, the earliest attempts to manage aircraft movements, were humble. In the early 1920s, at London's Croydon Airport, ground personnel used coloured flags to signal pilots. Red meant stop. Green meant go. It was a simple system, borrowed from railroads and adapted for the air. But it marked the beginning of something profound, the idea that flight could be coordinated from the ground. Across the Atlantic, a young man named Archie W. League stood beside a wheelbarrow in St. Louis, Missouri. Inside it were two flags, one red, one checkered, and a logbook. With these tools, League directed aircraft on the ground, becoming what many consider the first air traffic controller in the United States. He had no radar, no radio, no headset. Just a clear view of the runway and a sense of responsibility. These early efforts were rudimentary, but they laid the foundation for a profession that would soon become indispensable. The rise of radio. The 1930s brought a revolution: radio. With the advent of two-way radio communication, controllers could now speak directly to pilots. No longer limited to visual signals, they could offer instructions, warnings, and guidance in real time. This transformed the nature of flight. Pilots were no longer alone in the cockpit, they had a voice in their ear, watching over them from the ground. The first air traffic control centers emerged during this decade. They didn't have radar or digital displays. Instead, controllers used paper flight progress strips, plotting aircraft positions based on pilot reports and estimated times. They worked with maps, pencils, and intuition, building mental models of the sky and adjusting them constantly. It was a delicate dance of timing and trust. Controllers had to anticipate where each aircraft would be minutes into the future, issuing instructions to prevent conflicts before they occurred. It was a job that demanded precision, calm, and an almost preternatural sense of spatial awareness. War and the radar revolution. Then came World War II. The war accelerated aviation technology at an unprecedented pace. Aircraft became faster, more powerful, and more numerous. The need for coordination became critical, not just for safety, but for strategy. And so, radar was born. Originally developed for military use, radar allowed controllers to see aircraft on a screen, even in darkness or fog. After the war, this technology was adapted for civilian use, transforming air traffic control forever. No longer reliant solely on pilot reports, controllers could now monitor real-time positions, track multiple aircraft simultaneously, and respond to emergencies with greater speed and accuracy. The post-war years also saw the rise of commercial aviation. Jet engines replaced propellers. Airlines expanded across continents. Airports grew into sprawling hubs of activity. And with every new flight, the burden on air traffic controllers increased. The Grand Canyon collision on June 30, 1956, two commercial airliners collided in mid-air over the Grand Canyon. All 128 people aboard were killed. It was the deadliest aviation accident in US history at the time, and a wake-up call. The investigation revealed systemic flaws in the nation's air traffic control system. There were gaps in radar coverage. Communication protocols were inconsistent. Controllers lacked the tools and authority to manage high-altitude en route traffic effectively. In response, the US government created the Federal Aviation Agency, later renamed the Federal Aviation Administration, or FAA, in 1958. Its mission: to unify and modernize the nation's airspace. The FAA introduced stricter regulations, expanded radar coverage, and mandated the use of Instrument Flight Rules, IFR, for commercial flights. Controllers were now responsible not just for takeoffs and landings, but for guiding aircraft across the entire country. The sky had become a grid of invisible highways, and controllers were its traffic cops. The human element: despite the rise of technology, air traffic control remained a deeply human endeavor. Controllers worked in towers, approach control facilities, and en route centers. Each had a specific role. Tower controllers managed aircraft on the ground and in the immediate vicinity of the airport. Approach controllers handled arrivals and departures within a 30 to 50-mile radius. En route controllers guided aircraft across vast stretches of airspace, often handing them off from one sector to another like a relay race. The job was intense. Controllers had to maintain constant vigilance, juggling multiple aircraft, anticipating conflicts, and issuing clear, concise instructions. They spoke in a specialized language, ATC phraseology, designed to minimize ambiguity. Every word mattered. Every second counted. Mistakes could be catastrophic. And yet, the system worked. Day after day, year after year, millions of flights moved safely through the skies, thanks to the quiet competence of those on the ground. The Cold War and the expanding sky: as the Cold War intensified, so did the complexity of the skies. Military and civilian aircraft shared airspace. Surveillance planes, bombers, and commercial jets all moved through overlapping corridors. The need for coordination between military and civilian controllers became critical. NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, was established to monitor potential threats from the Soviet Union. Civilian air traffic controllers had to coordinate with military radar stations, especially when unidentified aircraft entered controlled airspace. The line between national defense and commercial safety blurred. Meanwhile, the jet age was in full swing. Aircraft like the Boeing 707 and Douglas DC-8 could fly faster and higher than ever before. Transatlantic flights became routine. The volume of air traffic surged. Controllers now had to manage not just more aircraft, but faster ones, with tighter separation standards and more complex routing. To meet the challenge, new technologies were introduced. Secondary surveillance radar, SSR, allowed controllers to receive transponder signals from aircraft, providing altitude and identification information. Flight data processing systems helped manage the growing workload. But even with these tools, the human controller remained at the center of the system. The culture of control: by the 1970s, air traffic control had become a culture unto itself. Controllers were known for their sharp minds, quick reflexes, and dry humor. They worked in high-pressure environments, often in windowless rooms filled with glowing radar screens and the constant hum of radio chatter. Training was rigorous. Candidates had to pass aptitude tests, complete months of classroom instruction, and undergo on-the-job training under the watchful eye of experienced mentors. Only a fraction made it through. Those who did were entrusted with enormous responsibility. Controllers developed a unique camaraderie. They relied on each other, trusted each other, and understood the stakes of their work. They celebrated quiet shifts and mourned the rare tragedies. They were invisible to the public, but indispensable to the system. And as the world moved toward the digital age, they stood at the threshold, ready to adapt, ready to evolve, ready to continue their silent watch over the skies. By the early 1980s, air traffic control had matured into a global system, complex, coordinated, and indispensable. Controllers were no longer just voices in the sky, they were the backbone of modern aviation. But beneath the surface of radar screens and clipped transmissions, tension was building. The PATCO strike in August 1981, the Professional Air Traffic Controllers Organization, PATCO, declared a nationwide strike in the United States. The demands were clear: shorter hours, better pay, and improved working conditions. Controllers were burning out. The stress of managing hundreds of lives per shift, often without breaks, had taken its toll. President Ronald Reagan responded swiftly. Declaring the strike illegal under federal law, he gave the strikers 48 hours to return to work. More than 11,000 refused. In an unprecedented move, Reagan fired them all. The consequences were immediate and profound. The FAA scrambled to fill the gaps, bringing in military controllers and hastily trained replacements. Airspace capacity was reduced. Delays mounted. For years, the system operated under strain. But the strike also forced a reckoning. The public saw, perhaps for the first time, just how vital controllers were. Their absence was felt in every grounded flight, every rerouted jet, every anxious passenger. The profession, once invisible, had become visible through crisis. Rebuilding and reform in the aftermath, the FAA launched aggressive recruitment and training programs. New technologies were introduced to ease the workload. Simulators became standard in controller training. Ergonomic workstations replaced outdated consoles. The culture of control began to shift, from endurance to sustainability. Controllers were still expected to perform under pressure, but now there was recognition of their humanity. Breaks were mandated. Mental health support was expanded. The job remained demanding, but the system began to care for its caretakers. Meanwhile, the skies continued to revolve. The digital turn the 1990s marked the beginning of the digital age in air traffic control. Analog radar systems gave way to digital displays. Flight data processing became automated. Controllers could now track aircraft with greater precision, predict conflicts earlier, and coordinate more efficiently. The introduction of Mode S transponders allowed aircraft to transmit detailed information, including altitude, identity, and intent. This enriched the radar picture, giving controllers a clearer view of the airspace. Voice communication also improved. Digital radios reduced interference. Data link systems allowed controllers to send text-based instructions directly to cockpit displays, minimizing miscommunication. But the most transformative shift was still to come, from ground-based radar to satellite-based surveillance. Next-gen and the satellite era in the early 2000s, the FAA launched the Next-Generation Air Transportation System, Next-Gen. Its goal was ambitious: to overhaul the entire U.S. airspace system using satellite technology, automation, and real-time data sharing. At the heart of Next-Gen was ADS-B, Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast. Unlike radar, which bounces signals off aircraft, ADS-B relies on GPS. Aircraft equipped with ADS-B transmit their exact position, speed, and heading to ground stations and other aircraft. This enabled more precise spacing, especially in remote areas where radar coverage was limited. It also allowed for real-time traffic awareness in the cockpit, giving pilots a clearer picture of their surroundings. Controllers, too, benefited. With ADS-B, they could manage more aircraft in the same airspace, reduce delays, and respond faster to deviations. The sky became more transparent, more predictable, more manageable. Global harmonization. As the US embraced Next-Gen, other countries launched parallel initiatives. Europe developed SESAR, the Single European Sky ATM Research Program. Australia, Canada, and parts of Asia adopted satellite surveillance and data link systems. International coordination became essential. Aircraft routinely crossed borders, oceans, and hemispheres. Controllers had to harmonize procedures, phraseology, and technology. Organizations like ICAO and IFATCA played a key role, setting global standards and facilitating collaboration. The dream of a seamless global airspace, once distant, was now within reach. The human-machine partnership with automation rising, some wondered, would controllers become obsolete? The answer, emphatically, was no. While machines could assist, analyze, and even predict, they could not replace human judgment. Controllers brought intuition, experience, and empathy, qualities no algorithm could replicate. They could sense when a pilot was stressed. They could adapt to unexpected weather. They could make split-second decisions in emergencies. They were not just operators, they were guardians. Technology became a partner, not a replacement. Controllers used predictive tools to anticipate conflicts. They relied on decision support systems to optimize routing. But the final call, the clearance, the vector, the altitude, still came from a human voice. The controller's world inside a modern control center, the atmosphere is focused, quiet, intense. Controllers sit before high-resolution displays, each showing a slice of the sky. Aircraft appear as icons, tagged with call signs, altitudes, and headings. Color-coded alerts flag potential conflicts. Weather overlays show turbulence, storms, and wind shear. Each controller manages a sector, an invisible block of airspace. As aircraft enter and exit, they're handed off to neighboring sectors. Coordination is constant. Communication is crisp. Distractions are few. The job demands total concentration. A moment's lapse can mean disaster. Controllers train for years, undergo regular evaluations, and must retire early to ensure peak performance. And yet, they love it. The challenge. The responsibility. The quiet pride of knowing that every safe arrival, every smooth departure, carries their fingerprint. Crisis and resilience. Air traffic control has faced its share of crises. The 9/11 attacks in 2001 tested the system like never before. Within minutes, controllers across the US were ordered to ground every aircraft. Thousands of flights were diverted, rerouted, or cancelled. The skies went silent. Controllers acted swiftly, calmly, professionally. They guided aircraft to safety. They coordinated with military units. They managed chaos with grace. In the aftermath, security protocols were tightened. Airspace restrictions were expanded. Controllers became part of the national defense fabric, working closely with intelligence and military agencies. More recently, the COVID-19 pandemic brought a different kind of challenge. Air traffic plummeted. Controllers worked reduced shifts. Training was disrupted. But the system endured. And as travel resumed, controllers returned, ready to guide the skies once more. The future of control. Looking ahead, air traffic control faces new frontiers. Urban air mobility, drones, air taxis, and autonomous vehicles will require new rules, new systems, and new kinds of controllers. Space tourism and suborbital flights will blur the line between aviation and aerospace. Artificial intelligence will play a larger role in prediction, coordination, and even voice interaction. But amid all this change, one thing remains constant: the human at the center. Controllers will continue to train, adapt, and evolve. They will learn new tools, master new procedures, and embrace new challenges. But they will never be replaced. Because air traffic control is not just a system. It's a calling. The invisible legacy. Most passengers never see an air traffic controller. They board their flights, sip their drinks, watch their movies, and land safely, never knowing the choreography that made it possible. But behind every smooth takeoff, every gentle descent, every uneventful cruise at 35,000 feet, there is a controller watching, guiding, and protecting. They are the silent guardians of the sky. The ones who never leave the ground, but whose presence is felt in every safe arrival. Their work is invisible, but their impact is immeasurable. From flags on a rooftop to satellites in orbit, the story of air traffic control is a story of evolution, resilience, and trust. It is a story of people, ordinary men and women, who keep the sky safe. And as the world continues to rise, they will be there, watching, guiding, protecting.